Hey there! Today we are cooking with stock, parsley, shallots, lemon, cheese, and rice. On this episode of What Do You Make of This, I'm going to show you how to make a basic risotto. So you may be wondering to yourself, what is risotto? Risotto is an Italian rice dish that's very rich, very creamy. It almost reminds me of a macaroni and cheese that's made with rice. But where macaroni and cheese has a lot of cream in it, risotto doesn't have any cream at all. Basically what you do is you slowly cook the rice to pull some of the starch out of it and use that starch from the rice to make a very rich velvety sauce. Now, risotto has a bit of a reputation for being a little difficult to make, but it's actually not that hard. Really, the hardest part of making risotto is just the fact that it's not even time consuming, but for the 20 to 30 minutes that it takes to cook, you have to stand there and stir it constantly. But that said, if you are capable of sitting here and stirring a pot of rice for 20 minutes, you can make risotto, and I'm going to show you how. So the first thing I'm going to do is take some stock. I've got about 4 cups of stock here, and I am making a fully vegetarian version of risotto. Get that in the pan. So I am using mushroom stock. I also spilled a little bit, so excuse me while I just grab a cloth and clean up my work area so that we don't have any kitchen fires. Okay, so stock going into a pot, and it's going to stay in this pot and very slowly move from the pot into the pan. I will show you how. You do want this stock to be warm before you start cooking though. You don't want to be using cold stock into your risotto or it's going to mess up the entire process. So give this a bit of a head start. You're not even necessarily looking for it to boil. You just want it to be issuing steam constantly and maybe a couple of tiny bubbles on the bottom of the pot. As long as it's hot enough that you wouldn't want to touch it, it's okay to use for the risotto. Now, what's going on in this pan is I'm going to start with about a tablespoon of butter. And just get that out of the way. And get this butter melted. You can also use oil. If you maybe are vegan or you just don't have any butter on hand, you can certainly use any kind of lightly flavored oil you like. Actually, olive oil would be very traditional in this as well. I just like the extra flavor that butter imparts. So I'm going to be using straight butter. And to that butter, I'm going to add between 1/4 to 1/3 cup of chopped shallots. And shallots are really just teeny tiny little onions that have a much milder flavor. If you don't have shallots, if you don't want to make an extra trip to the grocery store, by all means, you can just use about 1/4 of any onion that you have at home, and that will be fine. You do want to have a little bit of that onion flavor as the base for this though. It won't taste like onion, but it's just going to give it an extra depth of flavor that will really just pair nicely with the entire thick sauce that this risotto is going to become. So we're not even really going to be cooking the shallot a lot. I'm just going to be kind of almost infusing the butter with the shallot. So once it starts to get translucent, and by translucent, I mean you can just kind of start to see through a few spots of it. That's looking pretty good. I am going to then go in with rice. Now for risotto, traditionally, you are using a short grain rice, and I'm gonna try to maybe show you what it looks like here over my pan. So it's a shorter grain than a traditional like jasmine rice or basmati rice would be. It has a very high starch content, so I am going to be using carnaroli rice. You can also use arborio rice very traditionally, and I have heard stories that people have successfully made this with sushi rice. Basically, you're just looking for a shorter grain, very starchy rice. Now, if you don't have any of those rices, I'm just going to give these shallots a stir while we talk about rice. If you don't have any of those rices, say you've got a gigantic bag of jasmine rice at home, I have made it with that rice. It's not exactly the same, it's not quite as creamy because it's not as starchy of a rice, but it's still actually really good. I've even made it with barley and it was delicious. So, you know, use what you've got, use what you have, but if you really want to make a super classic traditional risotto, try to get your hands on a short grain white rice. Okay, so these are looking good. Into the pan with 1.5 cups of rice, I'm going to go. And I'm going to just give it a stir. So this rice, we don't even want to toast it, but you do just want to make sure it has a chance to get coated by the butter, to pick up some of the flavors of the shallot. This is really going to be kind of the initial blooming process to get it ready to start absorbing a lot of stock, because what's going to happen is to this 1.5 cups of rice, we're going to be using anywhere between 4 and 6 cups of liquid. And I say that very loosely because it really does just depend on how your rice is feeling that day. Some days 4 cups is all it takes. Other days you run out of stock entirely. And if that happens, you just keep going with regular water. That's totally fine. That stock flavor is already in there. So if it's just thirsty rice that day and it needs extra liquid, switch to water, keep on going, no big deal. Okay, I'm gonna get this heat a little bit higher on my pan here. Once I dumped in all of that rice, it kind of cooled my pan down. And in the meantime, you can see that this stock is really starting to steam. So that is looking good. So what you're looking to do with this rice is it's just going to get coated in the butter, like I had mentioned, but it's also starting to get just slightly more clear with a few little speckles of white. And that's a sign that it's starting to toast. Now you don't want it to turn brown. We're not looking for toasted rice. So careful you don't take it too far. That's kind of the thing about risotto is it's really a dish of just right. You don't want it to be too little. You don't want it to be too much. In this case, we don't want it undercooked, but we also don't want it over toasted. So once it kind of starts to smell a little bit nutty, if you lean over the pan, that's when you know it's ready for the next step. Okay, so next thing I'm doing is I'm going to go in. Now I'm going to be using lemon. I mentioned that at the very beginning. You are going to need lemon zest at the very end. You're also going to need lemon juice right now. So I just want to prepare you for that in advance. Whether you want to pre-zest your lemon and then squeeze the juice out of this guy, or do like I do and just have two different lemons, one that you have juiced and one you're going to zest at the very end. Totally up to you, but I just want to warn you, we're using the whole lemon today. So I am going to go in with about a tablespoon of lemon juice. And that's just going to kind of add a bright acid to this dish, and that goes in straight away. Now also, you can use half a cup of white wine. So if you've got white wine in your kitchen, certainly use it. Any wine that you would drink is okay to use in your risotto. White wine usually doesn't stick around that long in my kitchen, so I don't cook with it too often. Lemon juice it is for me. Either way, totally delicious. You're just looking for that light acid. Okay, so this is looking really good. What I'm going to do next is get a ladle, and I'm going to add probably about 2 ladles full of stock this first time around, maybe even 3. What you're really looking to do is essentially cover this rice for the first round. And when I say round, you're gonna see what I mean here. This is going to be a slow process of love. We're not just dumping all of that stock directly into the rice. That would be making steamed rice. That's an entirely different dish. Okay, so this is looking good. I'm gonna get my heat a little bit higher on my stove here. And what I'm going to do is just get this mixed around. It's going to start to come to a boil. So what I'm looking for this first addition of stock is just to have enough to very, very slightly cover the majority of the rice. It's going to start to bubble. It's happening very quickly actually, and that's because this stock is already hot. And what we're going to do is just very slowly cook this rice and pull the starch out of it. And as the rice starts to absorb the starch is going to come out, the stock is going to go in, and everything kind of starts to meld together to get really rich and really creamy. So what's going to happen is you're stirring this constantly. You don't want it to stick to the bottom. This is the part where I mentioned is where it gets its reputation for being a difficult dish. This isn't hard. It's just I can't go answer the phone or do dishes or talk to other people because I'm making risotto for dinner. But that's really the hardest part. So once this rice has absorbed almost all of the liquid, like it's almost to that danger zone where you're like, ooh, I think it's gonna start to dry out and burn, that's where you're going to add 1 more ladleful of stock and do it again, and again, and again, and again, and again, until all of the stock has been absorbed by the rice. After about 20 minutes of that, give it a taste. What you're looking for is something called al dente. And what that means is when you bite into it with your tooth, it's not quite mush, it's not like steamed rice, but it's also not crunchy. It's somewhere in between. It means to the tooth in Italian. So it's just right in the middle. Again, it's that balance of not too much and not enough, where you just want it to be a little bit chewy, but still cooked all the way through. And really it's a matter of personal preference. You can cook it longer if you like it softer. You can cook it less if you like it less. It's really just like pasta in this way. So this is now looking very nicely dried up. I'm going to add 1 more ladleful of stock. And then, because you probably don't want to just sit and watch me do this for 20 minutes straight, I'm going to keep on cooking. We're going to do this until I'm down to about that last ladleful of liquid, and then I will show you how to finish this dish. All right, so this risotto is just about ready. it has almost quadrupled in size. If you remember at the start, it was just enough rice grains to really coat the bottom of the pan. Now it's getting to be so full that I'm a little bit scared to keep stirring it because it might overflow. I swear every time I make risotto, I think it's not going to be enough, and then by the time it's done cooking, I'm scared I'll never be able to eat this much. So I'm looking forward to it. All right, so this is looking nice and rich and creamy, and it's just amazing really how creamy it becomes even though we haven't added anything to this except stock. It's just the starch that's in the rice has thickened all by itself. So what we're going to do next is just finish this up. What we have right now is a very delicious, very decadent, but very heavy meal. So what's nice to do is add some lemon zest to it, and that's just going to kind of brighten the flavors a little bit and make it so that every bite isn't exactly the same. You get a little bit more zest and pep, and then a couple that are a little bit richer and creamier, and it's just makes it for a very interesting, exciting experience to eat this. So I'm going to take a lemon, and I'm going to just grate honestly about the whole thing. I really like a lot of lemon zest when I make this. It's up to you. If you don't like it too lemony, you can just do, you know, a couple of little grates. But for this much, and this is really going to easily feed all by its, like just this risotto can generously feed 2 to 3 people. So because it's going to make so much, I'm just going to zest this entire lemon. And when you are zesting, by the way, you want to get the yellow, but leave this white behind because the white part is very bitter. You don't want that in your food, but the yellow part actually has more lemon flavor than lemon juice does. And so if you really want to brighten something up, this is the way to do it, is with some lemon zest. So as you're grating here, just be careful not to grate your own fingers, but if you don't have one of these microplanes, you can honestly just use a cheese grater. It's gonna be bigger chunks of lemon, but it's still delicious. I've done that in the past when I didn't have one of these handy, so no real wrong answer here. I'm also just going to scrape a little bit off those ends. And then another thing I want to point out is flip this over because you've got all of this lemon here. Don't leave that behind, that's good stuff. That's actually where most of the oils are, and that's even extra flavor. So let me get that out of the way. We're going to give this another stir. And so this lemon zest is just going to make it so much brighter, citrusier. I don't know if that's a real word, but it is today. More citrusy. Give this a really good stir. Okay, and I also just want to go in with a little bit of pepper. So I'm not going to add salt to this. You may have noticed at no point did I bust out the salt. That's because the stock that I was using already had salt in it. If you are using a low sodium stock, you may need to add some salt. Give it a taste. Do as your tongue decides. If it feels like it needs salt, add some salt. If it feels like it's fine, it's good to go. There's also going to be some salt in the Parmesan cheese that we're using, so take that into account. But I do want some pepper, so I'm going to add not a ton of pepper, maybe about 1/4 teaspoon for this entire pot. And again, this is a matter of taste. If you like things really peppery, go nuts. If you don't like a lot of pepper, just a little bit is all you need. And remember, you can always put more. You cannot take it back out again. So if you're not sure how much pepper you like in your risotto, start small and just add it in. Okay, so another good stir here. It's almost getting hard to stir because it's so heavy. That's how I know it's going to be good. Okay, final steps here. We are going to go in with some Parmesan cheese. So Parmesan is very traditional. You can certainly experiment with different cheeses. Traditionally though, you want to have a really dry, firm cheese, but you know, this is your risotto. So if you like different kinds of cheeses, by all means throw them in, see what happens. I've never met a dish that was ruined by any kind of cheese. So I'm going to go in about 1/4 to 1/2 cup of Parmesan, maybe a little more. I like cheese. And then I'm going to just give this another really good stir just to get that mixed in. And this is going to be, I mentioned at the very beginning, how this almost reminds me of a rice version of macaroni and cheese. This is where that cheese thing really starts to happen. And so you're just going to give this a good stir to get that cheese really melted in. And like I said, at this point, it is so thick and hearty and heavy that it's getting kind of hard to stir. This is, I cannot recommend enough, a wooden spoon if you've got it, because it really stands up to the risotto. It also doesn't scrape your pan, so it's a good way to prolong the life of the pans that you're cooking with. Look how cheesy it's getting. You can just like see the strings of cheese. Oh man, that is gonna be an amazing, amazing meal. Okay, that cheese is definitely melted. So last but not least, I have about a tablespoon of very finely chopped parsley here. And I'm going to go in with about a third of it. I like to leave a little bit behind just to garnish at the very end so you can sprinkle it on top and make your dish look extra pretty. So we'll leave a few pinches behind, but give that another stir. I do like to put a little bit in ahead of time just so it has a chance to kind of cook down and really infuse some parsley flavor into what you're cooking. But this way you get the best of both worlds. You get some cooked parsley, and then at the end you'll get a little bit more fresh, bright green parsley. Look how cheesy, I'm so blown away. So I put that little extra in. I mean, this just looks like decadence at its finest. I cannot wait to dig into this. I hope you can't either. Okay, this is looking exactly perfect. The rice, by the way, is just at that exact perfect spot where it's chewy but not crunchy. It's very soft, it's very fluffy. So I am going to just spread that out, let it hang out for just a minute to let that cheese finish melting. I've got the heat on super low. You could practically turn it off at this point. And I'm just going to get some things cleaned up and I will show you how to plate this. All right, it is plating time. So what I've got here is just a shallow dish. It's somewhere between a bowl and a plate, and that's something that you would very traditionally see risotto served in. By all means, use what you've got. If you've got big bowls, if you've got small plates, it's all gonna work. The one note though is very traditionally, this is served in a warm bowl, and I do recommend that because it's going to help make sure that the cheese and the starches that are in here don't start to solidify and get cold. So what you can do is just run this under some hot water and it'll be good to go after that. So hot water until it's nice and warm to the touch, dry it off. Now we're ready to plate. So I'm going to just get this risotto and give it one final stir now that it's had a chance to just kind of sit and mellow, but that cheese is still piping hot and melty. And I'm going to just go right into the middle of the bowl. And this is one of those things that, you know, like pasta, usually your eyes are bigger than your stomach. You think you're gonna be able to eat way more than you are, but like I said, this will absolutely feed 2 to 3 people very heartily. And if you need to stretch it with more than that, you could certainly add some protein or some vegetables to this. It even makes a great side dish. It does not have to be an entree, but on its own, it is delicious and decadent. And I just love it. All right. So next thing we're going to do is, with the parsley next. We'll do just a little bit of that parsley that we reserved. If you really want to make it fancy, get a little bit around the edge of your plate too. And then a little bit more of that cheese just going right in the center that you can mix in just to have a little bit of extra cheese, but also just extra melting cheese as you mix it and eat it. It'll just keep it from getting too congealed. You'll have a little bit more melting fresh as you're going. And then last but not least, to get extra fancy, we can just get a little parsley leaf, stick it in like that. There we go. Dinner is served. And this is a beautiful basic risotto, perfect if it's your first time making this dish. And the nice thing is this is a great blank canvas. So once you're familiar with it, you can certainly add different kinds of protein, different vegetables, and really make it your own. Now, as always, this recipe can be found in the description below. Please like and subscribe for more videos. I'm Jessica. Thanks for watching.